Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have you join us today. We're going to be started in about 1 minute. Great. Well, let's get started. Welcome again. We're so excited to have you join us today. My name is Lucero Herrera, and I'm a senior research analyst at the UCLA Labor Center. Today, we are presenting Nailing New Labor Models, Sectoral Boards, and we are joined by an amazing cohort of activists and policymakers who will be sharing their experience with sectoral boards. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We have Spanish and Nepali speakers on this panel, and we have interpretation available. So if you can now please click on the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your preferred language now. Everyone needs to be in a room. If you're using your smartphone, you can look for the 3 dots on your screen, click on More, select language interpretation, and choose between Spanish, Nepali, or English. Para los que hablan español, tenemos traducción disponible. Pueden darle clic en la parte inferior de su pantalla, donde hay como un globo, y ahí pueden escoger su idioma preferido. And now, Pooja, if you can make this announcement in Nepali.
नमस्ते म पूजा आजको लागि नेपाली इन्टरप्रेटर आजको यो मिटिङको लागि चाहिँ इन्टरप्रिटेसन 3टा भाषामा पाइन्छ जुन चाहिँ नेपाली अंग्रेजी अनि स्पेनिशमा यदि तपाईलाई कुनै यो 3टा भाषामध्ये एउटा भाषामा सुन्न र बोल्नु छ भने चाहिँ तपाईको स्क्रिनको तल्लोपट्टि जानुभयो भने तपाईले एउटा पृथ्वीको चिन्ह देख्नुहुन्छ त्यहाँ गएर चाहिँ ल्याङ्ग्वेज इन्टरप्रिटेसनमा तपाईले नेपाली छान्नु भयो भने चाहिँ तपाईले नेपालीमा सुन्न सक्नुहुन्छ आजको मिटिङ त्यसैगरी फोनबाट जोइन गर्नुभएको छ भने चाहिँ तपाईले 3टा थोप्लो देख्नुहुन्छ तपाईको स्क्रिनको तल्लोपट्टि अनि त्यहाँ गएर तपाईले मोरमा थिच्नु भयो भने चाहिँ ल्याङ्ग्वेज इन्टरप्रिटेसनमा फेरि नेपाली भाषा गएर छान्नुहोस् अनि आजको मिटिङ चाहिँ नेपालीमा त्यसरी सुन्न सक्नुहुन्छ धन्यवाद
Great, thank you, Pooja. So if you look now at the bottom of your screen, you should see the globe that says interpretation. So go ahead and select it and choose your preferred language. Awesome. Also, if you have any other questions during the webinar, during the presentation, please type them into the chat or type them into the Q&A box, and we will answer them towards the end of the webinar. And now that we have covered logistics, let's get started. Today's event is a collaboration between the UCLA Labor Center, the California Healthy Nail Salon Collaborative, WorkRise, ADICAR, Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network, Casa Latina in Seattle, the Seattle Office of Labor Standards, and the Office of Senator Jessica Ramos from the New York State Senate. Awesome. So our agenda for today, during the first part, we're going to be presenting some highlights from our report focused on sectoral boards. Then we'll hear from experts from the Seattle Domestic Worker Standards Board, and then from folks from the New York salon industry. We are then going to discuss lessons learned from both case studies, and then we'll open the floor to questions and comments from the audience. Let's now introduce our speakers. First, we have Dana Barnett. She is the Washington State organizer. I'm hearing some feedback. Okay. Apologies about that. Dana Barnett is the Washington State organizer for Hand in Hand for the Domestic Employers Network. Dana has been involved with the domestic worker rights movement since 2019 and has served as a chair of the Seattle Domestic Worker Standards Board. She's also a member of the Washington State Labor and Industry Advisory Board in 2021 and 2022 for ending the exclusion of domestic workers' eligibility for workers' compensation. We also have Bailey Freeman, who's the co-chair of the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board. Bailey has a decade-long career as a childcare provider and domestic worker. She co-founded the Nanny Collective to create an advocacy space for nannies and au pairs. And she's been the co-chair of the Domestic Workers Standards Board since 2021 and continues to center marginalized voices and empower workers to participate in developing local policy. We also have Sylvia Gonzalez, who is the co-chair of the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board. Sylvia is an immigrant domestic worker and has worked at Casa Latina for the past 5 years. She was part of the board of directors of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and has participated in the presentation of the Bill of the Bill of Rights for Domestic Workers at the national and local level. Aside from co-chairing the Domestic Workers Standards Board, she's also part of the Washington State Labor Council Executive Board. We also have Lane Middle, who's a policy analyst at the Seattle's Office of Labor Standards, where she serves as the city's liaison to the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board. Prior to her career in government, Lane worked as a union organizer and researcher for over a decade. She holds a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Next, we have Pratana Gurung, who's the campaigns and communications manager at Adhikar. Adhikar is based in Queens, New York, and it serves and organizes the Nepalese-speaking community, including nail salon workers and domestic workers. Pratana's leadership with Adhikar includes securing a New York Nail Salon Bill of Rights in 2015 and other health and safety regulations. As part of the New York Healthy Nail Salon Coalition, Adhikar is organizer of the All Hands In campaign to push for the passage of the Nail Salon Minimum Standards Council Act. This will create the country's first ever worker council for the nail salon industry. We will also hear from Senator Jessica Ramos from the New York State Senate representing District 13. Senator Ramos chairs the Senate Committee on Labor, where she's fought to pass historic legislation to grant farm and domestic workers basic labor protections, to tackle wage theft and worker safety, and secure $2.1 billion to create a fund for workers who have been excluded from pandemic-related relief. And we have Sweta Takali, who's a member leader of Adhikar. Sweta is a nail technician and has been working in the industry for 13 years since arriving as an immigrant to New York City from her home country of Nepal. She is an active member, leader of Adhikar, and sits on the steering committee of Adhikar's Nail Salon Workers Association. She's currently a campaign fellow at Adhikar. Great. Now that we've introduced our speakers, let's begin our presentation. So what are sectoral boards? Sectoral boards bring together workers, employers, and other stakeholders who develop labor standards that apply to a specific industry. These standards can include wage floors, workplace policies, and our benefits. What is key about this approach is that it provides an opportunity to lift standards in an entire industry, overcoming the challenges that often come when you're negotiating with an employer or like in a shop-by-shop basis. This type of bargaining can be very effective and useful, especially in sectors that are largely non-unionized, where wages and other conditions are already low, or where it is difficult to negotiate across multiple businesses. So why sectoral boards for nail salons? As I mentioned, one of the biggest advantages is that the standards set forth by a sectoral board apply to all the shops in an industry rather than setting terms by each individual shop. Sectoral boards can also cover workers in industries that have moved to hiring temporary or subcontracted workers or that rely on independent contractors. It will cover all workers. It also gives workers a seat at the table so that workers, employers, and other industry stakeholders have equal representation and decision-making power. Now, this is a fitting approach for the nail salon industry because most nail salons are mostly mom and pop businesses. They often have 10 or less employees. Most of the workers are immigrant and refugee women. The hiring structure is also mixed. Many of the nail salon workers are employees and many are independent contractors. And most of the workers earn low wages. So in March of this year, we released a report, Nailing New Labor Models, Exploring Sectoral Boards and High-Road Training Partnerships in the Nail Salon Sector, to really understand how we can improve conditions for the nail salon industry and other low-wage industries using this approach. For sectoral boards, we focus on 2 models. One is the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board established in 2018. And the other is the New York Fast Food Wage Board established in 2015. We talked to experts from both case studies and created this report to guide stakeholders in different industries who might be considering sectoral board as an approach. Here you can see a cover of our report, and you'll see that we cover important topics from how to launch the board, how to secure proper stakeholder representation, how to create the board structure, meetings, establish a process for decision-making, ensuring equity and racial disability and language justice on the board, understanding the role of community partners, and reviewing the board accomplishments, which often includes reviewing their policies and recommendations. And this report also serves as a how-to manual, really. So here we have like a snippet of a box that we include in a report that has learnings for the nail salon industry or other low-wage industries that are considering sectoral boards. We include also questions that folks might consider if they're pursuing this strategy. And our report also includes the perspectives of nail salon workers and owners on the feasibility of implementing sectoral boards for this industry. Great. So now that we have covered some background information, let's now jump to the conversation with our speakers from Seattle and New York. So let's start with Sylvia Gonzalez, who's the co-chair of the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board. Sylvia, can you share with us what is the Seattle Domestic Workers Standards Board?
Oh, gracias por la oportunidad y la invitación de estar aquí, ¿no? De traer nuestra experiencia, ¿verdad? Nuestra experiencia para los otros sectores laborales. ¿Qué es la mesa de estándares laborales? Mucha gente pregunta lo mismo, ¿no? ¿Qué hacen? ¿Qué es? Entonces, la mesa de estándares laborales es un lugar, un espacio para los trabajadores del hogar, los empleadores de hogares privados, las organizaciones de trabajadores y el público que consideren y sugieran formas de mejorar las condiciones laborales de los trabajadores del hogar. La Mesa de Estándares Laborales trabaja junto con la Oficina de Normas Laborales de la ciudad para hacer sugerencias, nuevas propuestas de ley o cambio en los esfuerzos de divulgación o alcance y presentarlas al Consejo Municipal y al alcalde de la ciudad. Pero en lo personal, para mí, es un espacio para elevar la voz de las trabajadoras del hogar que genera una esperanza para que pueda seguir avanzando la lucha por los derechos y la dignidad de todos los trabajadores del hogar. Y sé que poco a poco lo lograremos. En general, eso es la Mesa de Estándares Laborales, una inspiración para seguir en la lucha por los derechos de nosotros, los trabajadores del hogar.
Thank you, Sylvia. Let's now hear from Pratana Guru, who's the Director of Campaigns and Communications at Adhikar. Pratana, what is the approach to setting up a sectoral board to improve working conditions for nail salon workers in New York?
Thanks, Lucero. Thank you so much for everyone for coming, and it's so nice to see a full house on Zoom. And thank you, Sylvia, for actually kicking us off with that very succinct explanation of what sectoral boards are and their main purpose, right, which is building worker power in whichever industry. So in New York, one of the approaches that we've taken, Adhikar, as part of the New York Healthy Nail Salon Coalition, is looking at a sector-wide strategy of creating a council that is equal parts workers and equal parts small business employers and government representatives to come together to the table and discuss recommendations that impacted people themselves, see for themselves, and vision for themselves for the industry. And, you know, for us in New York, in the nail salon industry, as the slides before mentioned, right, it is a predominantly immigrant women of color led industry, both workers and small business employers, and close to 80% of workers are Asian American women. And for this solution, for us to raise industries, or raise standards industry wide, we really need an all hands on deck solution, right? And so that's exactly in New York why we call our campaign the All Hands In campaign, which we'll speak to later. But essentially we began in 2020 to begin conceptualizing this concept of a worker council. And so, you know, I think we really are excited to share about it today. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that in terms of what we're looking at in New York.
Thank you, Pratana. And thinking about this framework of building worker power, Sylvia, if I can pass it back to you, how did the Seattle Coalition decide on using sectoral boards as a strategy for lifting up domestic workers?
Gracias. ¿Me escuchan? Sí, ¿verdad? Ok. En el 2017, cuando estábamos trabajando la propuesta de ley, que la concejal Teresa Mosqueda era nuestra champion, nuestra líder, ¿verdad? Se dio la tarea de hacer varios grupos de enfoque para escuchar cuáles eran las necesidades de las trabajadoras del hogar. Y en realidad eran varias, ¿verdad? No nada más lo que ganamos. Todas queríamos los mismos derechos que tienen los demás trabajadores, como tiempo libre pagado, aseguranza médica, entre otros derechos. Pero incluir todos esos derechos que querían iba a ser una propuesta que nos iba a costar más ganarlas, ¿verdad? Entonces, es por eso que se buscó una manera de cómo incluir algo dentro de lo que se estaba proponiendo para dejarnos ese pequeño espacio para seguir en la lucha, ¿verdad? Entonces, ganar el salario mínimo que toda la gente tiene, ¿verdad? Derecho al salario mínimo, tiempo libre pagado, acceso a tiempo de comida. Pero ¿cómo podíamos seguir más adelante luchando por más derechos? Entonces se pensó, ¿sabes qué? Entonces vamos a incluir una mesa de estándares laborales que tenga la opción de poder seguir luchando más adelante. Entonces, lo más rápido, pues se puso en la propuesta de ley y también lo que era la mesa de estándares laborales. Y eso es lo que nos ha dado la oportunidad a seguir en la lucha, ¿verdad? Ya sabemos que los trabajadores del hogar no somos un sector común, ¿verdad? Somos un sector que hemos estado tan olvidados y que estamos fuera de las leyes laborales, que para nosotros tener esa mesa de estándares laborales era tan importante para poder seguir en la lucha. Por lo que otros trabajadores normales pueden ganar derechos más fáciles, para nosotros como trabajadores del hogar iba a ser mucho más complicado. Y cuando hablo de trabajadores del hogar en la ciudad de Seattle, hablamos de niñeros, limpiadoras de casas, jardineros, ¿verdad? Que también es bien importante mencionarlos. y amas de llaves, pero el tener esa mesa de estándares laborales es lo que nos da la esperanza para que nuestra voz siga levantándose, y es como seguimos luchando actualmente. Y ahorita actualmente estamos en una lucha para poner una legislación de tiempo libre pagado, ¿verdad? Que la pandemia nos hizo ver esa gran necesidad en eso, y eso es lo que nos da esta oportunidad de tener una mesa de estándares laborales.
Thank you, Sylvia. Bailey, can I pass it on to you as co-chair of the board? Can you speak about the role that employers have? Can you tell us about the collaboration that employers have now with workers on decision-making on the board?
Yes, thank you, Lucero. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm so happy we're getting to learn from each other and see how these things can apply to different industries. So this is wonderful. So much like other industries, domestic employers hold a significant amount of power and influence, both in the work arrangements and also in political spaces. They are also a diverse and unique group in that they really do have a personal stake in creating good conditions for workers in their homes. They are working parents, people with disabilities, seniors, and often family caregivers. They are employers in addition to the day-to-day work of managing their own careers and their personal affairs. So it's a little different, than just a typical employer where that's their job. These people are living their lives all around this. So our employer board members really model listening to workers' needs, and they do apply that knowledge in peer-to-peer outreach and also in policy discussions with local elected officials. They provide really important perspectives and ideas regarding employer outreach and education strategies. Education is so key to improving compliance and encouraging proactive employer participation in enforcement, which is really a lot less burdensome on the worker, who must really bring complaints at great personal risk. There's no anonymity when you are a domestic worker and you're the sole employee of that employer. So, domestic work arrangements really need to be well balanced and to work for both parties, with the employers recognizing their role in supporting their worker with the enforcement of their rights. So our employer board members really model engagement in both advocacy and in deferring to the worker as the expert on their own needs in the workplace. So when it comes to decision-making discussions about issues, we really, the employers really make an effort to have the worker lead that conversation, and then whatever those needs are, to make sure that it gets implemented and also works well for the employer community. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. Now, aside from workers and employers, the participation of community members has also been key in Seattle. As an organizer for Hand in Hand Dana, can you tell us what has been the role of community partners on the board?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having us and for this question. I really can't overstate the importance of the role of community organizations with the Standards Board. An alliance of community organizations led the campaign, as Sylvia said, to pass the ordinance initially and to create the board. During that time, community organizations built relationships with elected officials so that they were able to recruit and offer recommendations to the elected officials who were the ones who actually appointed the members to the board. Community organizations continue to support their members on the board. So some of the members of the board are also connected to worker organizations or to Hand in Hand, our employer network. And so we're able to continue to give them support when on the board. And we do find that, especially for workers and for employers both, if they don't have a connection to a broader community and to community organizations, they are less likely to be able to sustain their membership on the board. Community organizations also help to hold the board accountable and to bring in larger communities of domestic workers and their voices. Because even though the people on the board are themselves workers, they still are individuals and can't represent an entire community of workers. And they know this very well. So they work with community organizations to host meetings, listening sessions, focus groups, surveys, so that they can continue to be accountable to the community. And at the same time, it works the other way as well. The board holds the community organizations accountable. So in many cases with our implementation, our outreach and education, that work is actually done through contracts with the city, with community organizations. So the board continues to ask the community organizations what they're doing to help direct their work and to make sure that, you know, they are connected to the board and connected to what the workers on the board need. For just speaking for my own organization, Hand in Hand, as Bailey said, employers in the sector are a little bit unique. And so Hand in Hand, we work to ensure that the employers on the board are really there to support the best conditions for workers in their homes, and that they don't see their interests in opposition or separate from the interests of the workers, that they understand that our interests are really aligned in having dignity and care for all.
Thank you, Dana. Now let's hear from Lane. As the city's liaison to the Domestic Workers Standards Board, can you describe how the city of Seattle has leveraged its resources to support the goals of the Standards Board?
Sure, thank you for the question. I'd say that first and foremost, the board has helped create an ongoing feedback loop between workers, employers, and the city so that the relationships and specific recommendations from the board have informed all of the work that we do in this sector, from our enforcement work to outreach and communications, where we bounce ideas off one another and make sure that all of our work that we do in this area is informed by the experiences of the people who are most impacted by it. We also have, a small annual budget that we use to support the board that allows us to provide interpretation at all of our monthly public meetings, in addition to our committee and planning meetings, and also provide a small stipend to board members who are incurring costs that are associated with their participation if they're missing work, for example, in order to be able to participate and help inform our work. And then, thanks to advocacy from the board and other community supporters, the city provided a one-time funding of $400,000 in the 2022 budget, which allowed us to help advance some of the board's more specific recommendations. And that funding has allowed us to expand our community partnerships. It's allowed us to translate materials into new languages, and also fund research that will inform our policy development around the pay time off for domestic workers that Sylvia mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Lane, and thank you all. It's so exciting to hear what's been happening in Seattle. Now let's turn our focus back into New York. Let's hear from Pratana. And if you can tell us what led New York to sectoral boards as a strategy for lifting up labor standards in the nail salon industry, and why choose a sectoral strategy?
Yeah, so, we at Adhikar, we've been working with nail salon workers since our early days of our founding in 2005, and a lot of our organizing roots and where we learned campaigns was around actually our work on the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights campaign for New York State in 2010. And since then, tons of Domestic Worker Bill of Rights have popped up in other states as well. And so that was in a lot of ways an inspiration for us, right, in terms of understanding how we could really look at an industry that had been shunned by traditional labor for so long. And really building and re-envisioning new ways of raising standards. So, we started organizing with our coalition. It was Adhikar and Naikosh. Together, we co-founded in 2014 the New York Healthy Nail Salon Coalition in response to what really started hearing from workers to say that they wanted solutions in terms of building sort of a minimum wage, right, or licensing, issues to barriers to licensing, language access issues, tons of health and safety issues, right? And so actually in 2015 and 2016, we were able to win these really historic wins for the nail salon industry through a nail salon worker bill of rights, right? And so that was really exciting. And so that was where our momentum was really growing. And then in 2019, we were able to engage in a campaign to eliminate the sub-minimum tipped wage. So essentially raising minimum wage for nail salon workers in New York State to $15, right? And where they're not dependent on tips anymore. But in all of this, you know, all of it was campaigns are very capacity heavy. They require a lot of resources. And, you know, we started talking within the coalition of, is there a way to not look at raising standards in piecemeal fashion, one issue by one issue? You know, what about sector-wide strategies, right? And I think it was around 2019, we started internally talking about this with our coalition. And so in 2021, we joined forces with Senator Ramos, who's been a champion of this for us and with us, and, you know, really understood that this could be a way to really institutionalize worker voices, right, within government, within decision making, in a way that we could really address the plethora of different issues that the industry sees. And so for us, that's really kind of the short story of what led us to looking at sectoral boards as a strategy.
Thank you, Pratana. Now, Sweta, as a manicurist and a leader in Adhikar, how do you think sectoral boards can address workplace issues that manicurists face in New York?
नमस्ते, म श्वेता थकाली अनि अधिकारको मेम्बर लिडर। म इन्डस्ट्रीमा काम गरेको 13 वर्ष भयो हैन, अनि आज मलाई यहाँ बोल्ने मौका दिनुभएकोमा धन्यवाद। अब हाम्रो नेल सलुनको इस्युजहरु चाहिँ कसरी एड्रेस गर्छ यो क्याम्पेनले भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ सुरुमा चाहिँ हाम्रो इस्युज के हो भने बुझ्नु पर्यो हैन। त्यसमा जस्तै मेन त हामीले नेल टेक्निशियन भएर काम गरेर पाउने भनेको नि एउटा ज्याला हो हैन, वेजेस। अनि त्यो भन्दा अरु कुनै किसिमको बेनिफिट चाहिँ हामीले खासै पाएको हुँदैन। कुनै कुनै ठाउँमा दिन्छ होला, तर धेरै ठाउँमा चाहिँ पाएको हुँदैन। अनि ज्यालामा पनि हामी मिनिमम वेज प्राय मिनिमम वेजमै काम गर्ने भन्ने हो नेल टेक्निशियन भएर, तर त्यो मिनिमम वेज पनि हामीले पाइरहेको छैन हैन। मिनिमम वेज पनि पाउँदैन र हाम्रो शेड्युलहरु पनि फिक्स हुँदैन है। अनि यो काम चाहिँ एक किसिमले सिजनल जस्तो हो, समर टाइममा धेरै बिजी हुने अनि विन्टर टाइममा स्लो हुने। अनि समर टाइममा बिजी हुँदाखेरि पनि हामीले अब के ओभर टाइम गर्छौं हैन, गरे पनि हामीले चाहिँ त्यो ओभर टाइमको पेमेन्ट पनि पाएको हुँदैन। अनि विन्टर टाइममा नि स्लो भए पनि दिनभरि स्लो भए नि बेलुका लास्ट मिनेटमा कस्टमर लियो भने हामीले ओभर टाइम बस्नु पर्ने हुन्छ, तर त्यति बेलाको त्यो पैसा नि हामीलाई पे भएको हुँदैन। अनि यसरी अब काम पनि अब स्लो भयो ल, भोलि चाहिँ अब आज दिनबाट आऊ यसो भनेपछि हामीले त्यो चाहिँ अब अर्को ठाउँमा काम खोजेर हैन त्यसलाई कभर गर्न पनि मिल्ने त्यो चान्सै हुँदैन के। अनि अब त्यसमा चाहिँ अब नेल्समा काम गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हामीले धेरै केमिकलहरुसँग हैन खेल्नु पर्ने हुन्छ, चलाउनु पर्ने हुन्छ। अब जस्तै त्यो केमिकलहरु चाहिँ जस्तै अनि त्यो केमिकलहरुबाट बच्नलाई चाहिँ हामीले युज गर्नुपर्ने पीपीएहरु चाहिँ हामीले पर्याप्त मात्रामा चाहिँ पाउँदैनौं। कति ठाउँमा त दिदैन, अब दिए पनि हामीलाई चाहिँ चाहे अनुसारले चाहिँ युज गर्न नि पाउँदैन है। अब जस्तै पर्सनल मेरो स्टोरी चाहिँ के हो भन्दाखेरि एउटा चाहिँ एकदम एक्जाम्पल दिन्छु किनभने चाहिँ मेरो चाहिँ पहिला पनि म त्यो अब क्यालस रिमुभरहरु धेरै चाहिँ अब ग्लोभ्स नलाइकन युज गरेको कारणले गर्दा चाहिँ मेरो हात चाहिँ अलि सेन्सिटिभ भएर अब अलिकति रिमुभरहरु चलाउने बित्तिकै पोल्ने त्यस्तो हुने भएर म ग्लोभ्स चाहिँ लाउनु पर्ने। अनि यो चाहिँ मेरो पेन्डेमिक पछिको कुरा हो। अनि म नयाँ ठाउँमा काम सुरु गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ के रे मैले ग्लोभ्स लाउँदाखेरि चाहिँ अनि त्यहाँ चाहिँ त्यो ओनरले चाहिँ धेरै किन हात गर्दा नि किन ग्लोभ्स लाउनु पर्यो त्यस्तो भन्ने, तर मलाई त्यो रिमुभर छुने बित्तिकै मेरो छाला त पोल्न सुरु गर्छ। अनि त्यसपछि चाहिँ अनि मैले चाहिँ के गर्थेँ भन्दाखेरि ऊ रिसाउँछ भनेर मैले चाहिँ त्यो त्यहाँ चाहिँ व्हाइट कलर त्यो क्रिम कलरको जस्तो ग्लोभ्स छ भने मैले चाहिँ ब्लू कलरको लान्थेँ कि ऊ नरिसाओस् भनेर है। हामी त्यस्तो किसिमले चाहिँ सोचेर काम गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ कि त्यसमा चाहिँ हामीले मिनिमम स्यालेरी पनि नपाउने तर त्यसरी हामीले गर्नुपर्ने सिचुएसन छ हैन। अब यसरी केमिकलमा काम गर्दाखेरि हामीलाई असर झट्टै नथिए नि हामीलाई लङ टर्म पछि गएर चाहिँ त्यो असर देख्ने हुने कारणले गर्दाखेरि होला सायद उनीहरूले हामीलाई मार्क्सहरू त्यो चाहिने कुराहरू प्रोभाइड नगर्ने होइन अब यसरी कुनै पनि किसिमको हेल्थ इन्सुरेन्सदेखि लिएर 10 वर्ष 20 वर्ष जति वर्ष काम गरे पनि जुन दिन काम छोड्छ त्यसपछि हाम्रो केही फ्युचरै छैन होइन कुनै रिटायरमेन्ट बेनिफिट भनेको केही पनि छैन है अब यस्तै समस्याहरूले लिएर हामीले चाहिँ काम गरिरहेको छ अनि ल त्यो एक ठाउँमा त ल त्यस्तो प्रब्लम भयो किन अर्को ठाउँमा मुभ हुँदैन त नि अर्को सलुनमा जाउँ न भन्दाखेरि धेरै सलुनको स्टोरी यही नै हो कि होइन अर्को ठाउँमा गयो नि त्यही नै सिचुएसन आउँछ होइन यो एउटा मात्र सलुनको उसको नेल टेक्निसियनको समस्या होइन अनि यो धेरै सलुनहरूमा यो प्रब्लम छ त्यही भएर चाहिँ हामीलाई चाहिँ सेक्टरल बोर्ड यो चाहिँ हामीलाई एकदम जरुरी छ होइन जहाँ चाहिँ हामी ढुक्क भएर आफ्नो आवाज राख्न सकोस् होइन हाम्रो इस्युजहरूलाई चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ नडराइकन होइन आफ्नो जरुरी कुराहरू मिनिमम कुराहरू नै मागिरहेका छौँ नि त हामीले त अनि त्यही भएर चाहिँ यसले चाहिँ एकदम हेल्पफुल हुन्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ थ्याङ्क यू
Thank you so much for that answer. The next question is addressed to Senator Ramos. Senator, what makes a standards board the right policy approach for improving conditions for nail salon workers in New York?
Hi, everyone. It's good to see fellow-minded warriors for justice, especially for women, making sure that we're creating safe working spaces for women. And to me, the proposal for the Minimum Standards Council really responds to the urgency of the matter. And, you know, we know this is tough work. We know that it's a workforce that is exposed to chemicals that have had a detrimental impact, particularly on reproductive health. Among many other respiratory and other things. So even though New York many years ago passed some new bills, some new laws at the city level to regulate the ventilation of nail salons, it's just not enough. And it's clear that we cannot wait to unionize and wait and put the onus on the worker to be able to organize and build the power that would be required, to make that contractual change, if you will. So I would say that this allows the state to create a space, a respected space where both nail salon workers and owners can talk about challenges that they're facing and guarantee that, it'll be, I don't want to say mediated, but it will be heard at least within a space where justice will be upheld. And I think this is very important because it's obviously a growing industry. It's an industry with issues about human trafficking, issues, like I said before, in terms of workers' health. And so there are, many issues like wage theft even that need to be resolved within this industry. I mean, wage theft in New York State is embarrassingly rampant. It's, I believe, our Attorney General, Letitia James, the last number she provided was less than about 6 months ago, where she said $3.5 billion had been recovered in New York State. That's not even the number, for stolen wages. This is recovered wages. And so there's a lot more to do, and creating this space really makes it a priority on the to-do list.
Thank you, Senator Ramos. We're also curious to learn what has been your experience in terms of planning and collaborating with community partners on sectoral boards.
Oh, well, this is really my first experience in legislating a sectoral board. I am very happy that we are at a place where we are tackling the feminization of poverty in this way, especially. I think that as the daughter of a Colombian immigrant, I feel like this work responds to what our ancestors want us to see. So this is about healing generational traumas, ensuring that our moms, our tias, and young women are being treated with the respect that they deserve. So I think that it's really important that we're doing it. I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of the question.
Yeah, just like what's the experience been collaborating with the different advocates? And
I wanted to shout out, of course, Adhikar and the coalition, Parartha, and so many that I have met, organizers, nail salon workers like Shweta, who are bravely sharing their stories. I think for immigrant women particularly, there might not be that tradition of actually asking for what we want and what we need as women. And I think that it's really empowering for us to show the rest of the workforce, and certainly our daughters, that this is possible, that this organizing is possible. So my hat's off to the brave nail salon workers who are really leading the fight.
thank you, Senator Ramos. Now the same question for Lane. Can you tell us about your experience working in planning and collaborating with community partners in the sectoral board in Seattle?
Sure. I'd say that community board or community partners have been really instrumental in helping to, and first of all, just recruit and support board members and their participation on the board, but then also in providing some infrastructure to help the board actually follow through on ideas and recommendations that come up in our work. So, for example, the board members identified the need for paid time off for domestic workers. As Sylvia said, this really became apparent during the pandemic. And so we were able to work quickly with community partners to help conduct focus groups with workers and survey employers, contribute to legal and policy research in coordination with the city and the board. So there's that infrastructure that's already there and closely aligned with the board in order to be able to really follow through on those recommendations. And then, you know, the board in general, as folks have already said, kind of provides this accountability and structure to make sure that the city is always centering the experience of those who are most impacted by these policies that we're implementing and considering. And the city contracts with community partners in collaboration with the board to help execute all of those recommendations and ideas.
Thank you, Lane. Now this question is for Shweta. How are industry standards and workers' voices being raised through sectoral boards?
Okay. अब कसरी बढेछ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब जस्तै यो इन्डस्ट्रीलाई चाहिँ इम्प्रुभ गर्ने भनेपछि हैन अब एकदम सही मान्छे को होला त नि हैन अब हामी जस्तै काम गर्ने मान्छे जो चाहिँ यो उसबाट इम्प्याक्ट परिरहेको मान्छेहरू नै हो हैन जसको आवाज चाहिँ हामीलाई नै थाहा हुन्छ नि के चाहिँ यो उसमा समस्या छ र यसलाई कसरी सल्युसन यसको सुधार कसरी ल्याउने भनेर के हैन अनि यो क्याम्पेन भनेको चाहिँ जस्तै हाम्रो आवाज जस्तै के हैन हाम्रै सबै म जस्तै नेल सलुनमा काम गर्ने अरु कामदारहरू सबैको आवाज चाहिँ यो क्याम्पेनमा भएको कारणले चाहिँ जस्तै सुरुमा चाहिँ जब यो यस्तो चाहिँ क्याम्पेन चाहिँ यो बारेमा कुरा सुन्दा चाहिँ मलाई चाहिँ यो कस्तो लाग्थ्यो भन्दाखेरि यो नि पोसिबल हुन्छ र अब हामीले पनि अब हामीलाई चाहिँ यो चाहिन्छ भनेर एक ठाउँमा बसेर माग्ने डिमान्ड गर्ने भन्ने कुरा नि पोसिबल छ र जस्तो लागेको थियो कि मलाई चाहिँ हैन अनि जब त्यो यस्तै किसिमले अरु के फुड इन्डस्ट्री फास्ट फुड इन्डस्ट्री अनि डोमेस्टिक वर्कर इन्डस्ट्रीमा पनि यस्तै किसिमले काम भएको सुन्दाखेरि चाहिँ हुन्छ होला हाम्रोमा पनि हैन अब जस्तै एउटा ओनरसँग छुट्टी माग्न अब या सिक लिभ लिन त डराइ गर्नुपर्ने अब यसरी ठुलो जस्तो माग्ने भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ अलि हुँदैन कि जस्तो लाग्थ्यो के जब यो क्याम्पेन सुरु गरे नि अब के रे यो आइडिया सुरु गर्दा हाम्रो के छ त समस्याहरू र यसमा चाहिँ हामीले सल्युसन चाहिँ के गर्ने भनेर गर्दाखेरि अब यो 2 वर्ष हुन लागिसक्यो हैन अब यसमा चाहिँ हामीले यो क्याम्पेनको लागि चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ सुरुदेखिबाट जगबाट बसेर हामीले के चाहिने हो कुराहरू सबै हामी जस्तै नेल्समा काम गर्नेहरूको कुराहरू राखेको र यो कुरा चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ अब हामीले मात्र कुरा गरेर त यसमा चेन्जेस आउँदैन हामी एकअर्कासँग त धेरै कुरा गर्छौँ हामी कुरा गरे सकिन्छ होइन चेन्जेस ल्याउनलाई त अब ल मेकरहरूसँग चाहिँ पुग्नु पर्यो नि त अब हामी चाहिँ अब गयौँ अल्बानी गयौँ ल मेकरहरूसँग हामीले हाम्रो समस्याहरू राख्यौँ होइन उहाँहरूले पनि अब त्यो कुराहरू अब सुन्नुभयो होला सायद अब हामीलाई सपोर्ट गर्नुहुन्छ होला भन्ने हामीलाई आशा छ होइन त्यस सँगसँगै हामीले चाहिँ मिडियाहरूमा पनि आफ्नो स्टोरीहरू सेयर गऱ्यौँ अनि त्यो स्टोरीहरू सेयर गर्दाखेरि अब कति अब नयाँ मान्छे अबले चाहिँ हाम्रो सपोर्टमा आउनुहुन्छ होला भने हामीलाई आशा छ होइन अनि प्लस के अरे ल मेकरहरूले पनि उहाँहरूले नि त्यो सुनेपछि हाम्रो साँच्चैको व्यथा के हो भन्ने उहाँहरूले बुझ्नुभयो भने हामीलाई यसमा सपोर्ट गर्नुहुन्छ होला त्यति मात्र नभएर नेल्समै काम गर्ने कति साथीहरूलाई पनि आइडिया नरहेछ कि अनि मेरो अर्को लाटिनी कम्युनिटीको साथी एकजना हामीसँगै काम गर्ने उसले ए यस्तो भयो रहेछ नि भन्दा नि म गर्थेँ नि भन्दा उनीहरूले ए हो नेक्स्ट टाइम त हामी पनि जानुपर्छ भने कि त्यस्तो गर्दा चाहिँ अब त्यसले गर्दा चाहिँ अब अझै मान्छेहरू इन्भल्भ हुन्छ होइन अनि यो इस्यु चाहिँ एक ठाउँमा मात्र एकजनाको मात्र इस्यु नभएको भएर अब यो सेक्टरलाई नै इम्प्रुभ गर्नु छ भने त सबैजना एकै ठाउँमा आएर बसेर होइन एउटा डिसिजन निकाल्नु पर्यो नि त साँच्चैको चेन्ज ल्याउनु छ भनेपछि नै जहाँ चाहिँ हाम्रो आवाज पनि होस् ओनरहरूको आवाज पनि होस् होइन एउटा सल्युसन निस्कियोस् जसमा सबै खुसी होइन अब खुसी पनि सबै हामी मात्र नभएर ओनरहरू पनि खुसी होस् अनि एउटा ह्याप्पी अनि हेल्दी अब इन्भाइरोमेन्ट क्रिएट होस् एउटा इन्डस्ट्रीमा अनि अझै सबै ग्रो हुन पाओस् अनि त्यही हो अनि हामीलाई चाहिँ एकदम तपाईँहरू सबैको एकदम सपोर्ट चाहिन्छ होइन सपोर्ट र हामीले चाहिँ अहिले एकदम पोजिटिभ फिल भइरहेछ यो क्याम्पेन जसरी गइरहेछ अनि हामी जित्छौँ भन्ने मलाई आशा पनि छ थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच
Thank you, Sweta. We'd also like to hear your thoughts on this question, Bailey, regarding how workers' voices have been heard through the boards.
Absolutely, thank you. So in our experience, sectoral boards make it possible for those working in the field to make direct recommendations to and interact with local governments, on how to implement and enforce these very complex labor standards. Typical labor standard strategies don't necessarily work for unique sectors like domestic work. And so that sort of practical input from the worker is really, really important. And our board meetings are open to the public. And so that gives even more access to the process by workers. And the worker perspective on the board is sort of appropriately weighted to compensate for the common power dynamics that are in work arrangements that traditionally favor the employer. So we want to make sure that that worker voice is really held up to make that a priority. Also, it's a very isolating industry. So isolated workers can really benefit from structures that not only bring them together and encourage a collective voice, but bring their community into the scope of governmental resources and processes so that everyone is building awareness around this. Historically, informal industries with very few guardrails, like domestic work, can really benefit from worker and employer communities coming together in a structured way, because that really creates opportunities for larger scale change. And what's most important for us in Seattle is that the creation of our board was built into the ordinance, from 2018, which contains very necessary but kind of basic protections. And the purpose of the board was not only to inform on the implementation of the law, but to also improve upon it and to make ongoing amendments to the ordinance with the aim of improving conditions for workers. It's this sort of long-term powerful position that sectoral boards can really have that will drive industry standards up, especially when led by the voices of those who are most affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey, and thank you all for sharing that. I know folks in different industries and in other regions in this call are really eager to learn what lessons are there from New York and Seattle that can be applied across the country, particularly in regions that are maybe less worker-friendly or in industry sectors that are non-unionized. Senator Ramos, why don't we start with you? What lessons can you glean from New York that can be applied elsewhere? Okay, so maybe let's go to Lynn, if you can take this one. What lessons from Seattle can be applied elsewhere?
Sylvia, I think that you may have been on tap for this one, but I can jump in if you'd like.
Ok, como quieras, yo también lo puedo hacer como tú quieras, pero ¿podemos compartir tiempo y tiempo o estamos muy cortos en tiempo? Creo que
No,
son
we have time.
lecciones. Creo que son muchas lecciones que hemos aprendido. Hace un momento hablaba con una amiga de Nueva York, ¿verdad? Quise hacer mi tarea antes de llegar a este panel. Y sabemos que Nueva York fue el primer estado en ganar una Carta de Derechos para las Trabajadoras del Hogar, ¿verdad? Entonces, tenemos algo en común. Nueva York fue el primer estado y Seattle fue la primera ciudad en ganar cartas de derechos. Y como aliados de la Alianza Nacional de Trabajadoras del Hogar, creo que hemos aprendido tanto de ellos que una de las grandes maneras que podemos dejar o que podemos llevar a esos estados o ciudades donde no son tan amigables los políticos con las leyes es organizando, ¿verdad? Yo escuchaba hace un momento no sé si pronuncio bien, a Shweta, pero ella me inspiró demasiado, ¿verdad? Porque aunque somos de sectores diferentes, tenemos en común muchas cosas, ¿verdad? Personas inmigrantes, personas de color, y en todos los estados, en todo el país, habemos personas inmigrantes y personas de color que queremos beneficios para nosotros, que queremos salir a la luz, ¿verdad? Entonces, creo que una de las grandes cosas que podemos llevar para esos estados que no tienen leyes que los favorezcan es organizando, pero también llevando nuestras historias. Siempre he dicho que nuestras historias es nuestra mejor herramienta, ¿verdad? Para conmover esos corazones tan duros a veces que están tan necios en no pasar políticas o beneficios para los trabajadores, pero nuestras historias siempre van a ser y serán nuestra mejor herramienta para hacer esos cambios en estos sistemas tan duros que tenemos para la comunidad, en su mayoría la comunidad inmigrante. Lane, o no sé si hay tiempo.
Yes, please.
Sure. I think I'd like to add that for sectors where there has not historically been a lot of regulation or unionization representation of these workers, I think it's really important to figure out mechanisms like a sectoral board to help kind of institutionalize and continue to build feedback for workers and employers, folks who are directly impacted by these policies, to continue to work together over the long term. There's a lot that we're breaking new ground all the time. And so in order to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, try new things, see how they work, try something else, we need to be able to continue to talk to one another so that we can continue to center those experiences as we move forward and find new ways of improving standards for everyone.
Thank you, Lane. Senator Ramos, if you can also answer this, like what lessons can we learn from New York that can be applied to other regions or other industries?
Thanks for the question. We haven't passed the bill yet, but so far the lesson is to not be scared and organize. I think for us lawmakers, it's to listen to the workers, trust the workers, encourage different factions of the workforce or organizing across ethnicities, right? Making sure that every stakeholder is included in the decision making, I think, is very important. And hopefully more states, especially right to work states, unfortunately, think Lainey's right. What we've been doing is really ushering in a new era of organizing, and we're trying different things. Here in New York, the sectoral bargaining bill would be the first of its kind. So it's definitely us trying a new way of organizing and protecting workers. And when it comes to all of that, it's all hands in, which actually happens to be the slogan for the campaign to win our bill. It's all hands in. It really is. So it's really exciting to hear that Seattle is organizing. I'll actually share. I hope Lainey doesn't mind. Lainey and I used to be colleagues at 32 BJ many years ago. So it's really nice to see her here. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I'm not surprised that she's doing amazing work because she always did. But it's really an exciting moment to be organizing, especially with women, especially with immigrant women, women of color, because we know that across so many sectors, and I mentioned it before, but poverty is feminized, and taking care of women is taking care of mothers, is taking care of children. It's just another way to act.
Thank you, Senator Ramos. So Pratana, what has been the biggest challenge in developing the sectoral board policy in New York? And what lessons can we learn moving forward?
Yeah, I got the fun challenges question. And I think, one of the big problems, or one of the big challenges, I'll say, is that obviously, we have the Seattle model, there's other models, the fast food wage board in New York, but relatively, this is a fairly innovative way of thinking about labor policy, or this is an innovative way of thinking about solutions to labor, right? And, I think for us, what we know is that because the issues in these industries, in the nail salon industry, are systemic, and for systemic issues, we need a systemic solution, right? So for us, it's a no-brainer, right? But because it is a fairly innovative way of thinking about labor policy, there's a lot of education that we've seen that we've had to do that's taken time, right? Education to different stakeholders, to electeds, to the media, to supporters. And with that, because we're talking about systemic change to a way that decisions are being made on a state level, right, across an entire industry, that means that we're challenging historic systems of power, the way that decisions have been made for ages, right? And in this way, our communities have been left out of the decision-making seat. And so with that, you can imagine, right, wherever you are, that's going to come with its own set of pushbacks, and will make people in power uncomfortable, right? And so I think between those two, right, sort of things around juggling challenges, are definitely components to keep in mind, right, if you are thinking about something like this for your state. In that way, I think it's been very instrumental for us to be able to lean in our national nail salon organizing partners, for example, the California Healthy Nail Salon Collaborative, other groups like Viet Aid in Boston, Viet Lead in Philly, Mekong NYC, and really sharing with them our strategy, how things are going. I know folks in these other states are also looking at similar strategies in their field. And so in general, we can lean into knowing that there's support and being able to understand how the strategy could look like in other states, and it can help inform how we move. But it's also a really exciting way to motivate other stakeholders and decision makers and create buy-in for the strategy that we're proposing in New York. And then I would just want to uplift Sylvia's point in how important organizing is in this, right? You need to engage workers from the very beginning of this, and that's exactly what we did, right? From conceptualization to bill drafting to the campaign plan, right? And only with a strong base of workers and a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual base of workers, right, that are representative of the entire industry, educating and organizing, will anyone really be set up to have a successful campaign to be able to create this type of a solution or this type of a sectoral council or board, whatever it is that you decide to name it in your neck of the woods. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Pratana. And now, Dana, could you answer that question as well? Like, what has been the biggest challenge in implementing the Domestic Worker Standards Board in Seattle?
Yeah, and glad to build off that because, you know, it's interesting. Some of the same factors, the systemic oppression, systemic power relations still play out once we've created a board, right? And so the main challenges aren't that surprising, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily things we anticipated. This being the first time this is ever a board like this has existed in Seattle. So compensating volunteer workers, board members, I think it's come up before. That has been a really big challenge, even though we work really hard to make sure the timing of the board is not while people are working. It's still, for domestic workers, it still could be time that they could be working. So it could be taking the small wages that they have out of their pocket. And so it's really important that workers are compensated for that time. And that's been a challenge because that's not the way the city usually handles volunteer boards. And so I think it took us about 2 to 3 years to create some kind of compensation. But that has happened and we have worked on it. Also, the lack of experience or knowledge for the board members about how city government works and what kind of power the board actually has, what the board can do, how it can assert power. You know, as a board, most of us didn't really have experience being on these kinds of boards before. And so we often would lean pretty heavily on our staff person from the city to say, like, what can we do? What are the limits of what we can do? And sort of direct our work, when there were times when the board actually might have to push back or might have to assert itself into, you know, the power that it take the power that it has. So that has been a challenge, but it's also something that we are working on, getting some training for board members about how to be on a city board. And just how the city works, how the budget works, when we have to lobby council members, all of those things were things that not everyone on the board has known. It's been helpful, again, to have the community organizations there to help support with that and to have folks from the city give guidance. Again, just the different types of power and relationships. So language justice, immigrant justice, racism, and white dominant culture, all of those things show up on the board. This board has worked really hard, I think, on language justice, and I think that we've learned a lot of lessons, although we still have more to learn. But how to really make sure that the board, that the most marginalized members of the board are really comfortable and really able to speak up and take leadership. And so looking at who does feel comfortable speaking and leading the board and who doesn't. And we've had workshops and trainings in racial equity and working with the different members of the board about power and relationship. And so that, again, that's been really helpful, but not necessarily something that we knew was going to play out or exactly how it was going to play out ahead of time. As we've talked about, overcoming barriers for workers, about enforcement, about working with the city and feeling comfortable, the informality of the industry and the decentralized employers makes it really difficult just to find the employers, find where these relationships are actually happening and recruit them. Also, it is hard to recruit and retain members, and it's hard to recruit employer members because oftentimes employers of household workers don't even see themselves as employers. And they also don't necessarily think that they have a role in domestic worker rights or that it's their issue to be involved in. Another thing is just that working with the city and through the city, it's very slow work. And so I think the expectations of many of our members and the community sometimes is that we'll be able to get things done a lot faster than we're able to. And so that can lead to some tensions and frustrations. And it's also been really good lessons, I think, for everybody on every side, again, about how much you can push and also about when things are going to take a lot longer than you thought they were going to take.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you all for this very productive and insightful conversation. We're now going to open the floor to questions and reactions from the audience. As a reminder, you can type your questions in the Q&A box. We have a few already. So from, let's see, from Elizabeth Sunwood. She's asking, what are ideas and potential ways that sectoral boards or Bill of Rights can have an enforcement piece to them so that employers can be held more accountable? Sylvia, do you want to take this one?
Gracias. Sí, yo siempre, y lo hemos comentado, ¿no? Muchas veces cuando ganamos una carta de derechos, wow, estamos súper alegres, ganamos, pero desde mi punto de vista creo que uno de los retos más grandes es la implementación y cómo educar a la gente de lo que se ganó. Entonces, uno de los grandes retos ha sido llevar esta educación tanto a empleadores como trabajadores. Como mencionaba Dana, los empleadores a veces no saben que tienen responsabilidades. Entonces, ha sido un reto bastante grande y también los trabajadores no saben qué derechos han ganado y aparte, aunque lo sepan, luego entra el miedo. Entra el miedo a cómo exigir ellos sus derechos. Miedos por cuestiones de migración, miedo a quedarse sin trabajo cuando ellos están reclamando sus derechos, ¿verdad? Y pesa más ese miedo que el tener que decir que han sido víctimas de robo de salario. Entonces, parte grande de nosotros es cómo educar a estos trabajadores y ayudarles a armarse de valor para pedir sus derechos y poder presentar una queja cuando hayan sido víctimas de robo de salario o de cualquier tipo de victimización.
Thank you, Sylvia. Senator Ramos, are you able to answer this question as well? Again, the question is, what are ideas and potential ways that sectoral boards or Bill of Rights can have an enforcement piece to them so that employers can be held more accountable?
The senator is unavailable right now, so maybe we could pivot to another panelist.
Thank you. Lane, would you be able to speak to this question?
Well, I think Sylvia's point about the employer education is really critical. Our ordinance does have rights that including minimum wage, right to meal and rest breaks that are enforceable by our office, by the Office of Labor Standards. And one of the things that we would like to continue to work with the board and community partners on is not just how to make sure that employers and hiring entities are aware of their responsibilities, but also how to support workers so that they feel more confident and secure in coming forward when there is a violation and when they do need to take action. I think, as someone said earlier, maybe Bailey, that there's no anonymity often in domestic work when you come forward with a complaint.
Thank you, Lane. Now we have a question from Anne Chiaverini. She asked, I'm curious about advocating at the state versus city level. Has any of the advocates here had more success at one level over the other? Pratana, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, and it means that you're already thinking about strategy. And, I think every state is different in what the dynamics are between city and state government, right? And when I say city and state government, both the way that agencies and the governments interact with one another, but also the personalities, right? What are the power dynamics between city and state? And I think doing a power map of your potential targets, of the people that you want to engage in terms of who are your targets, of who will be able to, who will be your targets for winning a sectoral board or sectoral council, can start demystifying a little bit about, is this a city thing or is it a state thing, right? Which way do we go? How do we kind of have them both lean on each other? I will give you 2 examples in New York. One, not with this current campaign, but the Nail Salon Worker Bill of Rights in 2015. It originally was a city bill. At the time, the public advocate was the now Attorney General, Tish James. And, we were kind of on roads to push forward for a city bill because the majority of our base was in New York City. But at the time, I think if you're familiar with New York State politics, there are dynamics between city and state and such that at the governor at the time, Governor Cuomo, came in and pretty much just decided to make this a state thing, right? And I think it's a classic example of how when you're running a campaign, you got to be ready for anything goes. And so what ended up happening in a good way, right, is that the wins that we were pushing for got enacted across the entire state, right? I will say the second thing I will say is another way that you can kind of think about how to build city and state into one another is looking at different elements of your campaign, right? For us, our theory of change across a lot of our coalition members is we build services, everyday services that workers need, as a way to bring them through the doors of our coalition and our worker centers. And through services, we engage them on leadership development, political education. Through there, we politicize our base, and then we run campaigns to hopefully win more services. And that's kind of how the cycle goes in a circle, right? And so the way that we have our work set up is that our workforce development, our services is all funded by New York City, right? And it becomes a platform for us to both bring in a lot of money and resources to build out our base, and our campaigns are run on the state level. And so that's how we kind of push both of them, through kind of that cycle in our theory of change, looking at the fact that New York City Council has a lot more money, therefore is a place to get resources, but New York State is a place that we can really push policy because we've created precedent for nail salon industry policy in the past there.
Pratana. Okay, the next question is, I am curious about what a policy proposal that provides paid time off for domestic workers might look like. Has the sectoral board gotten that far? Lane, would you be able to answer this?
Sure. We're still in the research phase of our paid time off proposal for domestic workers. We're also looking to places like Philadelphia and San Francisco and Illinois, who are also working on this question, having, similarly realized just how critical it is in the wake of the pandemic. I can tell you, and so far that's involved focus groups with over 100 different workers and employer surveys and so forth. And what we've found so far is that different kinds of domestic workers have different needs. So there are some folks who work for one employer, and then there are some house cleaners and gardeners, for example, who tend to have many different employers. So some sort of portability is really critical for those folks. Stay tuned. We'll have more information on what a policy proposal can look like, but right now we're still in the development phase.
Thank you, Lane. We also have a question asking, how do the sectoral boards referenced here get their authority? Bailey, will you take this one?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so in the case of Seattle, our board gets its authority from the ordinance directly. So the creation of the board was written into the law. The Seattle Domestic Workers Ordinance has sort of 5 main components. It's minimum wage, meal and rest breaks, making sure that workers can keep their documents in their own possession, which a lot of times employers will seek to hold those in a quote unquote safe space. And so that is really important. And then the other one is the creation of the standards board. So that was enshrined in the law, and it has very sort of clear directives, at least for the first couple of years of activity for the board. You know, we were to create a 2-year work plan and to focus on improvements on the ordinance. So we have sort of a very clear directive in terms of what we're meant to be doing. And also there is sort of written into that, I believe, that the Office of Labor Standards is sort of meant to defer to our recommendations as often as possible. And as mentioned, there have been situations where we wanted to push for something more than they felt like they could provide in that moment. So there is a sort of give and take of advocacy in that situation. But generally speaking, we work very closely with the Office of Labor Standards, and they are encouraged to take our recommendations very seriously and that provides pathways also to lobbying with local politicians as well.
Thank you, Bailey. The second part of that question is, how do all workers and employers learn about such words in sectors such as domestic workers and nail salon workers? Dana, can you answer this for Seattle?
Sure. As we've discussed, and as you can imagine, with domestic work, there's no registry of all the households who are, having domestic workers come. There's no way to really know exactly where everyone is. So it is really challenging. It's also why it's so important that there's budget built into outreach and education, because that will definitely be needed. So for the Office of Labor Standards, the way that a lot of outreach and education about the ordinance and the board happens is through the work with community partners. So community partners like myself at Hand in Hand, we contract with the city to get information out to employers. Organizations like Casa Latina get information out to workers. And so we do that through a lot of different means, both on social media, at events, in person as much as possible, working with all sorts of community organizations, religious organizations, workplaces. Anywhere you go, you might be able to find someone who is involved in a domestic employer-worker relationship. And so we do a lot through peer-to-peer education. So that is something that both with workers and with employers is really important, since so much of these jobs are actually in word of mouth.
Thank you, Dana. And Pratana, can you answer the same question for New York?
Yeah, sure. So, for us in New York, I think a good foundation in terms of getting the word out for this has been the fact that the organizations involved in this campaign and this effort are community-based organizations that have been doing this work for decades, right? And so because they're rooted in communities that are already deeply entrenched in nail salons, right? Southeast Asian communities, South Asian communities, Nepali speaking communities, Latina communities, word of mouth, and the fact that we have a presence, right? Organizations like ourselves and coalitions have a presence that already is a great way to kind of kick things off, right? In terms of people understanding, hey, this is happening, right? But then as Swetha had mentioned earlier, right, there are definitely workers out there who are like, I had no idea, I work in the industry, I had no idea that this was happening, I want to get involved. And a lot of that we can attribute to the fact that, earlier I was talking about our theory of change. Workers start out in our beauty school, in our workforce development school, and that's where not only are they learning skills that they can immediately take to work and able to get a license and help support their everyday needs, but they're also learning skills like how to recruit others, right? How to do outreach, how to organize, how to base build, right? How to be good spokespeople. And through the school, people then trickle into leadership positions, right? We have a really strong leadership committee called the Steering Committee of our Nail Salon Workers Association. And so then, you know, it's not just staff, right? It's also leaders talking to one another, right? Sharing posts on social media, photos of, hey, we went to Albany, right? And all of that really snowballs into people knowing about what's happening and people wanting to get involved or asking questions, right? And I think that goes for both workers and employers, although we don't, you know, we do work with employers, but not as many, and they're not our base. So I'll just leave it at that, but I think those components are really integral in making sure that we are able to get the word out to workers and employers.
Thank you, Pratana. And if I can stay with you, we have another question regarding tips and wage theft. How can those be possibly addressed by a standards board? I know the senator mentioned that wage theft is an issue in New York State. So have there been any conversations about including that into the standards board in New York?
Yeah, so definitely, you know, we've built the policy to also include being able to talk about wages. And obviously the board has not happened yet. We're still pushing for it to pass, but you know, that was obviously a big issue that we wanted workers and advocates when we were building the bill and building the campaign, wanted to make sure that the board would be able to address wages, right, and solutions on how to you know, alleviate the issues of wage theft, because obviously right now is probably similar in other states. A lot of it is sort of you file a case potentially with the DOL or similar agency of that nature in your state, and of course there's backlog, and sometimes workers don't hear for years even on something very small, and it's quite disappointing. And so the current system of alleviating wage theft, you know, beyond that, of course, there's escalation tactics, right? And definitely, you know, other organizations that we know that work in other industries have done campaigns around wage theft cases, right? And really escalating in that way with direct action and all of that. So of course, there's different tactics currently, but I think when it comes to the wage board, or sorry, the sectoral board that we have, we're really hoping that within the board we can discuss other alternatives to making sure that we can address wage theft.
Thank you, Pratana, and thank you again to all of you for such an engaging conversations. We were really lucky to have you participating today. We're definitely seeing the importance of using sectoral approaches to create industry-wide structural changes and improve conditions for workers. From today's conversation, we learned the importance of developing strong partnerships between employers, workers, and city and state policymakers. We also learned the role that government agencies play in supporting these efforts. We also heard from our folks about all the work that goes behind setting up and implementing sectoral boards, all the outreach, the education, the relationship building to ensure that, you know, the board's goals and vision are acted upon. We really hope that this conversation was fruitful and insightful to all of you. And we hope that we can continue building partnerships across industries and regions to envision new ways to lift up workers and working conditions and create equitable and sustainable workplaces. If you'd like to read our full report, you can find it at this link. We also are going to paste it in the chat. And for those that are interested, a recording of this webinar will be available after today. Thank you again, everyone, for coming in today. We appreciate your time and sharing with us today, and we hope to see you in the future. Thank you all. Bye.